transform systems with collective agency. Our learning objectives for our hour today are here. We hope to inform participants of the remarkable impact experienced by staff who engaged in learning labs. We also intend to discuss the development from research to implementation. And lastly, we are going to highlight lessons learned to equip participants with practical tips to support school improvement efforts. So with us in planning, with us in implementing, with us in the work is Dr. Hinds. He is our area superintendent in Pinellas County Schools. He oversees Area 3 schools, and he is, again, a school leader, and he had an emergency. So he is joining us, hopefully within the hour. But if not, a lot of his thought has gone into this presentation, and we will be sure to share his research, his findings, and then trends that we are working to see through in our district.
My name is Dr. Keisha Albritton. I am the school climate transformation staff developer for 2 high schools and previously a middle school in Area 3.
I am Dominique Dudley. I too am a staff developer in Pinellas County Schools for school climate, specifically in Area 3. I facilitate learning labs in the middle school, but I support and am embedded in multiple schools throughout the district, and I will support in facilitating this conversation this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Aydin. I'm a faculty director of Global Engagement Office and a professor of Rehab Psych and Special Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I had the privilege to learn from, work with Pinellas County School leaders, and I look forward to our conversation today.
So we are going to start with a bit of how our learning labs look. So we meet typically in our learning labs either once a month or bi-weekly, and each time we meet, we start by sharing or resharing the norms. So these norms are directly pulled from the work of the learning lab. We found that they cover all that it needs to be covered in our meetings. And for our time together today for the next hour, we are going to ask that what is shared within the context of the conversation is confidential, honored, and respected. Use I statements. No one speaks for another or for an entire group of people. Avoid critiquing others' experiences. Focus on your own experiences. Listen with curiosity and the willingness to learn and change. Ask for clarification. Assume positive intent. And lastly, suspend judgment. Be open to the kernel of wisdom in each person's story. So Dr. Ball is going to start by sharing all that there is to know about the Learning Lab.
Thank you, Dominique. So Learning Lab is a collective decision-making and problem-solving team. That's the process through which local stakeholders, including students, family members, administrators, teachers, paraprofessionals, community, family members, and any like a representative of civic organizations serving the school, get together, examine the issues they face, their school community face, and then they develop locally meaningful and sustainable solutions based on their needs, interests, and goals. And this group consists of usually 12 to 15 people. And there are learning lab models implemented at school level. And you are going to see the learning lab implemented as a large urban school district. We have also learning labs implemented in teacher preparation and specialized schools like in Brazil, and we have learning labs implemented in Turkey, and we have learning labs has been implemented across multiple states, from New Hampshire to Kansas to California, currently Illinois. So the idea is that basically we are just thinking the systemic issues that our schools are facing are very adaptive and complex. To be able to understand and address those complex issues like racial disproportionality, achievement gap, school climate disparities or outcome disparities, academic achievement disparities, students with and without disabilities are experiencing, those are complex, historically accumulated issues. No one person can solve those issues. No one great leader of district leader, no one great school principal, no one great researcher can solve that issue. Those are complex historical issues. Therefore, they require systemic, collective, and continuous transformative approaches. So our aim in the Learning Lab is twofold. One is to develop the new system. And you're going to see today in different schools, it may take different forms, but basically develop the culturally responsive, locally meaningful, inclusive school systems, either in school discipline or academic achievement, so forth and so on. And while you are developing this system, you are relying on the collective agency of the local stakeholders. Local stakeholders with diverse and often opposing histories, experiences and needs and goals can come together and form a collective agency. They bring their individual agencies, individual interests, individual goals through the process of Learning Lab. They form a collective agency. So their impact is very systemic. They have a concrete outcome. This is not a focus group. This is not a town hall meeting. This is a Learning Lab is not some kind of like a parents outreach activities. This is basically a task force or a group of aiming to design a new system, improve the system, their existing system. That's the one outcome. The second outcome is the process. So this once school systems practice and develop their own process, they can utilize the same process for different purposes. Let's say they utilize the Learning Lab for improving their school climate or addressing their racial disproportionality in school discipline. Then once their task is done, they can utilize the Learning Lab for developing culture responsive science curriculum or system of is that a process through which they can engage in continuous systemic improvement, be a new culture responsive system. So we have a cycle of implementation in the design phase. So this is the first year. Your Learning Lab members are formed, the Learning Lab is formed, then they go through the cycle of change, what we call cycle of change, examining the on the surface everyday issues they are facing. They look at their quantitative data from schools, school districts, and then also they bring their individual personal experiences as parents sharing their experience with the school system. Students are sharing their experience, how they're experiencing the school system, challenges, possibilities, but also strengths, what works and what needs to be improved. And then once they move into on the surface, they discuss those and they share their experiences on the surface they face every day. Then they move into deeper root cause analysis through, again, historical analysis, empirical analysis. They look at the root causes of those issues they are facing. For example, Learning Labs in the original model, our focus was the racial disproportionality. So they look at the patterns and predictors of racial disproportionality. Then they move to school system, discipline system, academic system, which are reproducing those disproportionate outcomes. So how students behaviors are managed, what are the expected behaviors, what are the rules of regulations, rules of engagement or division of labor. Then they move into modeling phase where they, based on their existing analysis, they map out the existing system where when they are mapping out, they see the challenges and possibilities and also breakdowns of the system. Based on that, they develop, and based on their needs and goals, they developed a newer system called culture responsive discipline system, let's say. And then they examine that system for feasibility, and then they plan for implementation next academic year. And then they reflect on the process again. They want to examine the process so that they can utilize the same decision-making, inclusive decision-making process Learning Lab later for other issues. And the next academic year, usually, they implement the new system. And then the Learning Lab oversees the implementation of the new system. So members of the Learning Lab may change, but the Learning Lab process continues. And again, in short, through the Learning Lab, we open up the decision-making, problem-solving, and knowledge production at schools to students, family members, community members, teachers and paraprofessionals who have been historically excluded from schools' decision-making processes. Now we are going to see an excellent example of this implementation of Learning Lab against all the political, social shifts and even the global pandemic. So I'm turning to my colleagues to present their work.
Thank you. So in his absence, this is Dr. Dywayne Hinds. He is, or was, when the project started, the middle school executive director. And what he found in working with Mrs. Janetta Hagerbrook is we had a lot of schools who were struggling with creating equitable processes and outcomes for the children that they were seeing in buildings. And so around 2018, 2019 school year, they decided to write a grant to fund doing some in-depth investigation and support for our middle schools, who at the time were having more referrals than our elementary or our high schools, and students were not being disciplined at an equitable rate. And so, thanks, Dominique. And so these are some of the data points that encourage them to pursue the grant. So when we were looking at Black and Brown students, they were receiving 4 times the rate of referrals than their non-Black counterparts. And they were receiving almost double the amount of accessory offenses, which are, in our district, those are the offenses where students are being adjudicated outside of our system. When we're looking at in-school suspension versus out-of-school suspension, as you can see, the rates were significantly higher. And so when we were looking at ways to support not just our students, but our schools, this project, the School Climate Transformation Grant, became a pivotal response to the discipline disparity that we were seeing in buildings. So,
and it's important to note that as Dr. Hinds was working as a middle school executive, he worked very closely with Mrs. Hagerbrook, and together they had an extremely creative approach to finding the people to do the work. One of the people who they hired to do the work is Dr. Albritton, who came with such a background in math, and she is very well respected and highly esteemed in our district, but they were intentional about selecting people who could go into tight, tough spaces and do the work. So I know that the theme of this meeting and the spring meeting is all about doing the work amidst chaos. So when we were thinking about what this might look like, or when they were thinking about what it looked a lot like Dr. Albritton, and Mrs. Hagerbrook and Dr. Hinds worked collaboratively to place us strategically in spaces where we could get the work done. So if you're listening and you're considering a learning lab like Peter shared, or you're thinking about what it may look like, being very creative and intentional is going to be a great process for you to go through.
And just to reiterate the importance of the hiring process, that became the way of work that all of the people that were on the team were intentional about working together. The work is difficult work. When you're looking at supporting a building and them creating systemic change, the people that are doing that systemic change work also need a system of support. And so having a diverse group working with your schools is also really important. My background was math. Dominique's background is ELA. She also has some elementary school experience. The other staff developers had disciplinary credentials in social studies and science, and again, in elementary. So we had a variety of experiences and backgrounds to pull from to support schools with. And so one of the most important things that we saw as a result of us working in schools, supporting them with the learning lab, supporting them with adjusting those discipline matrices after they were created was we saw a significant decrease in assessor offenses, especially for Black and Brown students. We saw significant decreases for Black 7th and 8th graders, and 8th graders had the largest decreases, and they also received the longest time in that learning lab experience. And we saw that there were significant decreases for other students. However, Black and Brown children benefited the most. We also found that fewer Black 8th graders were receiving out-of-school suspensions, which means we were keeping them in the building and that they were being more successful. The other important factor to kind of highlight as we were looking at their data was students who had experienced a building that was successfully utilized in the learning lab. You found that their attendance was better. Those 8th graders who had experienced a decrease in discipline also missed fewer days of school. And that the 6th graders showed a significant decrease overall when you're matching 6th graders in different buildings for overall attendance and unexcused absences, with the largest decrease being for Black 6th graders. And our 6th graders generally have a difficult time transitioning. And so to see their absences decrease signaled to us that they had a greater sense of belonging in that building.
Another important piece of data that Dr. Hinds intended to share is schools that were in what we were referring to as a pilot. Those schools that received an abundance of quality professional development also had reduced disciplinary outcomes for Black and Brown students. So for example, in the schools that we supported here in PCS, we facilitated training that aligned to the Learning Lab methodology. So we facilitated training regarding the topic of belonging, universal design for learning, creating systems that support all learners, culturally diverse learning styles. We wrote professional development, we facilitated it to the teachers who were also the disseminators of the discipline and the outcomes. So when we found that the Learning Lab plus professional development led to better outcomes, it was like mind-blowing. So when we look back at that discipline data that shows from the beginning of the work to 2021-2022 school year, which is when we were fully embedded in these schools 5 days a week, mind-blowing. I know that we talked about saving questions for the end, but I don't want us to get too far without emphasizing what happens when a student receives assessor. So oftentimes assessor is out of school suspension. So for us in Pinellas, assessor would be like battery, a fight, something deemed as somewhat violent, Keisha, or something that would be considered breaking the law if you're outside of the school setting. So often that would be out of school suspension. Sometimes it would be an ISS, which is in school suspension, but most often it would be out of school. So next, we are going to take you through the journey. Dr. Albritton is going to walk us through the years of this work, and then I will share the present day before we share the lessons learned.
So this is our original team. We have Mrs. Hagebrook, we have now Dr. Ariola Barnett, we have Ms. Celeste Williams, we have Ms. Kelly Flannery, we have Vonna Thomas. I am in yellow pants and Dominique is on the end. And as you can see, some of us are masked up because we are in the throes of COVID. And this is one of our first summer training sessions where we are providing professional development. One of the things that we found in doing the redesign of our discipline matrices is that teachers weren't skilled in the practices that they needed to make children feel like they belonged in the building, like they had a space in that place. And because of that, they were acting out. And so in the summer of 2020, schools that were displaying some disproportionality in their discipline outcomes, we had 5 schools that agreed to participate. And we spent the summer creating professional development, examining school data, examining the work of other entities that were doing this work, and fully embedded in the throes of COVID as we were getting ready. So working from home, collaborating at 7 o'clock in the morning, doing all of the things. And then in the fall, like many school districts, we were both hybrid, asynchronous and synchronous. We were creating newsletters to help support mindset shifts. We were creating professional development. We were facilitating that development. And we were starting to form the Learning Lab. We were looking at disciplinary practices. We were examining PBIS systems, positive behavior intervention support systems that were established in the schools or maybe needed some extra work. And looking at ways that those systems were either working for or against particular groups of students, and looking at who those systems were not working for. And it was our role in the buildings to make sure that we were being intentional about highlighting that data for buildings so that it wasn't lost in it's working for some kids, but not working for other kids. And as a part of that, we also brought in those families of the students who were being impacted both positively and negatively to create the learning labs. And so we were working with families, we were working with community partners. And when I say community partners, I mean, for example, on the learning lab in the middle school that I was in, we invited our our recreational center partners, where our students would go after school. We invited the art club people. We invited some of our other church youth groups. We invited people who also cared for those students after school because they're a part of that child's village. And so we wanted to make sure that all of the people who are seeing that student, who could add a different voice to what we were seeing in the building, had an opportunity to take a look at our matrix, to be a part of the development of what that matrix should look like so that we could get better outcomes for those students. And so by the end of that 2020-21 school year, all of our students in our district were back in buildings. And so we had the opportunity to see whether this discipline matrix was actually going to work or not. And so that summer before 2021-22 school year, we were holding professional development trainings. We invited Dr. Ball to join us in Florida, and we were hosting a learning lab for the learning lab participants to say, you know, how did it go? How did it feel developing those matrices? Did you see a difference in your kid when they came home? What are some things that we still need to work on? And then by the fall of 2021, we were all back in the same buildings. We were supporting our administrators in revising their systems of discipline, what infractions actually received, whether those infractions were equitable across groups. We were monitoring and making sure that the discipline matrices that we had developed with the learning lab were being implemented. And if they weren't, what were some shifts that needed to take place? Taking those matrices back to the learning lab and saying, this is still happening. What are some other strategies that maybe we should be looking at? Providing training for people, not just face-to-face, but also virtually, which was new for us. And facilitating that so that we could get more people involved in the work, involved in the professional development. And then making sure that schools were implementing the things that parents and families and community partners said were important to them, that they valued. And then moving into the 22-23 school year, we were positioning ourselves for scaling up. And scaling up looked really different. Here's an example of what those discipline matrices looked like. This is the one from my school. One of the things that we wanted to show you was that they look very different. The matrices that those learning labs designed were very specific to the problems that they were seeing in that building, but also that the interventions and the consequences were specific to the cultures of those families in the building. So this is Dominique's school's matrices, and it looks very different. This is another middle school that was participating in the pilot project. As you can see, they have different things that they're looking for. This is another school. They had very different details, different things that were important to them, different things they were monitoring. And this is our last matrix. In addition to the matrix being intentional and specific to the culture of that building, we wanted to make sure that there was a balance in who was in the space. So this is data from the first 2 years of my learning lab, where we had a support person, we had administrators, we had teachers, we had parents, and we had community partners. Having those multiple views was really important to making sure that all of the different ways that people saw children were valued and had a voice in that space, so that we didn't create a system that wasn't going to produce the outcomes that we needed.
So at the end of our learning lab, the first year, we were all very excited to meet the families in person. We had done quite a bit virtually as it was during COVID, but we were excited to meet in person, break bread, celebrate the great work, because a lot of our families shared they had never been involved in the process in this way. Oftentimes decisions were made for and not with, but the work of the Learning Lab really does celebrate the work of the collective, and it values the voices of all community stakeholders. So here you'll see the celebration from the school that I supported, and here is the leader who was the leader at the time, a part of the party, a part of the celebration, and grateful to have a product that led to such great outcomes for students. So we shared earlier that Dr. Hinds has been a super pivotal part of the process, of the work, of the gathering of resources to make sure that we are able to do this work in schools. And he is on the call and able to speak to a little bit more of the why it was necessary and how in his role he made sure learning labs were occurring in schools.
So good afternoon. I do apologize for my lateness. I just left a budget meeting looking at all my schools and talking about funding. And ideally, one of the things that I did speak about today that was approved for our budget for the 25-26 school year is the funding of my instructional staff developers who are part of this work, so this work can continue for the upcoming school year. So that meeting went a little long today, longer than what anticipated. But when you think about in Pinellas County Schools, I've been in education about 27 years. At the end of this year, it'll be 27 years. And I've been in Pinellas County 12 years. Prior to serving as the area superintendent of schools, I was the executive director for middle school education. And in our district, my job was to support teaching and learning initiatives when it comes to curriculum and instruction, testing, anything that has to do with what we do when it comes to impacting students. And so one of the things that I saw early on in my first part of this entry into Pinellas County was the disparate practices when it came to the referral rate for Black and Brown students as opposed to non-Black and Brown students, as well as when you think about CESR, which is our more codes that are directly related to and they're reported to the state of Florida. And those codes are used to determine if a school is considered safe or not safe. And then obviously the consequences of in-school and out-of-school suspension. So what you can see from your screen is you do see when we first started this project up from in 18-19 up until 21-22, you'll see what the data points were showing for our district, which really speaks to why we did what we did. We were very intentional about this work, using this data to drive our practices. Also, when you look at the next slide, some of the things that we saw in terms of improvements, who's advancing?
It's me. I'm going to go ahead and go back.
Oh, okay, you're going back. Okay, sorry.
All good.
When you look at this particular pieces, we just kind of areas that show that we did see some decreases in terms of the disciplinary rate for students within our district across our middle schools. And also, we saw the largest decrease when it came to students in 7th to 8th grade, Black students in particular, as well as a fewer fewer out of school suspensions as it relates to that particular data. We also looked at the attendance in terms of this whole notion around, are students made to feel like they belong in that space? How are, from the moment they walk into that environment, how are they being treated? How they're being perceived? How are they being celebrated? And I know Dominique just kind of indicated one of the things they did at one of the schools she worked directly with is the celebrations, right? Making students part of it. And how do we bring them to the table to talk about even when we have problems within our schools? And we did notice that the students that participated in the intervention over those course of 2 years, of course, they missed fewer days because now students wanted to be in school. There was a want to be in that space and environment, and part of that is I was made to feel like I'm a part of this environment. And so we also saw a decrease in 6th grade of students that were being unexcused absences, and largely decreased for our Black students in grade 6. And pretty much that's why we did what we did. To be honest with you, it was all about looking at the data. What is the data telling us for our students? And how do we work to implement something that can change the trajectory that we were seeing with our data points of our students over time? And primarily we looked at discipline as well as attendance. And I know we're not going to talk about it during this session, but we also looked at the performance of students academically in those spaces as well.
So after being fully embedded in the 5 initial pilot schools, after we saw that there were trends in the right direction, leading to a reduction in out-of-school suspension, in-school suspension, cessors, referrals, improved attendance rates, we did what we referred to as a scale up. So we took the work on the road. Instead of us being fully embedded in the 5 schools Monday through Friday, we started to support other schools and providing district-wide professional development, as well as consulting with other schools to know what do we see in their discipline, how could we bring what we've done in other spaces and do what is best for this environment. So that is still somewhat the model that we are working present day. I'm embedded in 2 schools. Dr. Albritton is embedded in 2 schools, but we support Area 3, which is nearly, if not more, 20 schools where we are able to support as needed to provide them with professional development or an opportunity to analyze their systems. Again, we facilitate monthly learning labs designed to strengthen partnerships and problem solve. They are still happening. Presently, we have learning labs coming up in the next few weeks where we're identifying problems. And as Dr. Hinds shared and as Dr. Albritton shared, our focus changes based on the need. Dr. Ball said at the start, it's based on your local context. So in some environments, it might be different populations of students, considering gifted or fundamental. It could be a grade level, it could be an ethnicity, whatever you're noticing in your data that suggests a learning lab would be beneficial, that is the focus of your group. So over the years, over many years, we have learned some very valuable lessons, and we're excited to share the top 7 lessons that we have learned as a collective in doing the work. We do intend to share with you at the end of this meeting a bit of a guide so that we can save you some of the hassle and we learn the lessons the hard way so that you don't have to. The first is buy-in from leadership is critical. Dr. Hinds' support has been by far saved us so much, because when you have someone that is saying this is what we will do because it's best for children, it gets done. So that has been very helpful. Remembering that slow progress is progress. Slow down and see what is occurring. Dr. Albritton shared that that very first summer, we were so fired up. We were looking at the data. We knew it wasn't right. And we went into the schools thinking that everyone was just going to listen because we were cute and we wore yellow shirts. No. People are married to their systems until you shift their mindset. So slow progress is progress. Next is don't build systems around people. We shared that after being fully embedded for 2 or 3 years, we were pulled to go in other directions. And fortunately, the systems that we built were not built around us. They were built by the collective, and they were intended to work in our absence. Next, consider the leadership capacity, social capital, and resources needed to drive change. So wherever you are in the world, and wherever you're hoping to do the work, it's so important that the person that's leading it has the capacity to lead it, that people will follow them, or they know people who will be willing to join in, and then ensure that you have the resources needed. So for us in Pinellas, we needed funding to be able to fund 5 staff developers to do the work. That was one of our needs. Next is to build a good team. Be intentional about who you have as the face of the work. Be intentional about who you have communicating the work. Just being very intentional to ensure that your team is a team that can get it done. The big lesson number 6, systems should be built thoughtfully and based on context. As you saw on the screens, on the slides before, the matrix varied from school. It was built for that school. It wasn't something that you could pick up and take to your school across town. It had to be for your population. And then lastly, celebrate small wins. A student who misses 1 out of 10 days compared to last time, 8 out of 10, we celebrate them for coming those 7 extra days. So celebrating the small wins. We want to ensure that when you hang up on this call today, you have a starting space for a conversation, an email that you're about to send out, like Peter shared, your next meeting, like Lauren shared, she's been in meetings all day. We want you to leave this and have an idea as to what could be your next. And we want to make sure that you know if you and your team are ready to disrupt and interrupt the structures, processes, and practices that are perpetuating your school's inequities. So the first reflective question that we have is, do you have data to confirm the problem? So consider looking at various data points. The next is, are your stakeholders looking at the problem the same way? Next, do you have interventions and are they aligned with your problem? And lastly, are your interventions taking place and are the interventions research-based and linked to improve student outcomes? So we felt that as a team, these 4 questions would give you a starting place, because you may have 2 of the 4, you may have 3 of the 4, but working on having all 4 of those would save you some time. And again, like we shared those lessons, we did the lift so that you won't have that same level of struggle that we experienced. We're excited to share that we are the keynote speakers, or one of the keynote speakers, in Tennessee at the end of this month. We will be there sharing more in detail. We would love your feedback on this session. We have a QR code in the bottom right. We would love to know what you want to know more of. How could we improve the storytelling of the journey? And we would also like to capture your email so that we can share some resources with you. So I believe Ms. Chopra and Ms. Lauren are going to facilitate the questions that are in the chat.
Thank you, Pinellas County and Dr. Ball, for this very thoughtful and very detailed description of the journey that you've done. In such a short time, you were able to share so much of it. So really, really, really appreciate it. Also appreciate the different connections that you in your district made over the time, connecting with parents and the partners, community partners, thinking about the interventions that schools were doing to be able to think about the academic interventions that schools were doing, and connecting it with the policies that they had around discipline. Just such amazing work. So again, thank you for that. I really want to encourage people to add some of their questions in the chat. I see one right here. Thank you for your transformative and inclusive leadership. Collecting and sharing data on the effectiveness of new support systems can help counteract skepticism around equity work. I'd love to learn from your experience how do you navigate political backlash, especially in the current political climate where DEI efforts are increasingly suffocated or even punished?
Yeah, I think I did type, but I typed I didn't put it in the whole chat. But
I'll put that in.
Perfect. I will tell you one of the things. First of all, I will say we've been very fortunate in our district that our school board is very supportive. Our superintendent and those are my colleagues that sit at the cabinet level that I serve on. And really, it's about just keeping the main thing. We talk about how do we create environments where students feel like they are part of those environments, and ensuring that the efforts that we're putting into schools are having an impact on their ultimate goal, which is student achievement measures. So that's getting kids in school to be engaged. That's getting kids to perform on different assessments. So it's really trying to keep the main thing. We're not getting caught up on the different titles that will probably create more of buzz or area of concern to say this work is bad work, so to speak. So again, we're still doing the work. And again, I think right now the beauty is we still have the support of our team. And as I indicated, my lateness today was going through my budget for my 24 schools that I oversee as the area superintendent and advocating for the 2 positions that I feel like are very needed and work that I've seen evidence of support within my schools. And so that is going to continue as a result of the data points that we're able to show of how our discipline data is decreasing, our attendance for students is increasing, and then also a measure that we're looking at is the academic achievement of students. So I think we're not getting hung up on the different titles. It's about the work and making sure the work is translating into impact to students and how do we make places better for students.
Thank you, Dr. Hinds. There's another question about how do you engage parents, guardians in the process? That was so amazing to see how you all did that. So how did you engage them in the process? How do you make the school space welcoming to parents, guardians who are often excluded and feel looked down upon, especially in multilingual Brown and Black communities?
One of the things that we were very intentional about is looking for the students who were having more desperate outcomes, looking for parents who had previously engaged in a negative school experience and calling those families, having conversations with them. What would make that feeling less for you? How can we get you involved in the process? And being very intentional about including them on purpose. For our multilingual families, I believe Kelly was intentional about making sure that there was a staff person available who could translate in that learning lab so that those families would feel included in the process. And I believe Vana also had someone from one of the community organizations join the meeting so that the families that were participating in that community could come experience the school in a different light, but also feel connected to be able to participate completely. My meetings tended to be virtual, so the need to have sitters and making sure that people could participate was alleviated because they didn't have to come face to face. So examining the population that you have in your building and asking them, what do you need to be a part of this process? And being very intentional about targeting families, not in a negative light, but to include them so that everyone who is being impacted by our practices has an opportunity to speak on them.
Perfectly stated. I see that the add-on to your question is especially in school spaces where school staff is not representative of the communities that they serve. For us, in the initial school where we were facilitating the learning lab, we leaned on the community to be representative of the student body. So we were in a predominantly Black school and our staff did not represent that in numbers. So what we did was we went to the local churches, we went to the local rec centers, we went where people were, and we said, hey, we know at one point this school was the community school. This school was a school that people were proud to send their child to. We need help bringing it back. Please come and help us. So having a true, humble attitude about going to find the people, while also not discrediting the lived experiences of staff members, inviting them to the table, inviting them to share, but also creating space for different populations of people to provide perspective.
And that include also, I don't know, being very explicit too, like community, like we reached out to a pastor who was from a community that had connections with different people and say, hey, are there people that you can recommend that live in this school community that can serve on this learning lab group with this school? And, you know, we got people that you probably would have never walked into the school to be part of a committee like this and do the work that they're doing. So very refreshing to do that work with them.
Hi, Diane. You're welcome to unmute to ask your question.
Well, thank you for providing the space and also for sharing the work. It's amazing. I don't know if clap hands and congratulations are sufficient to appreciate the commitment that you do. So congratulations again. My question to the team, especially to Dr. Hinds, is how did you use the data that you collected at the second slide that you collected after the system is being implemented? How did you use those data in the learning lab and to inform the continuity of the work?
Well, I'll have Dr. Albritton or Ms. Dudley talk about how they use that data in the learning lab setting to help problem solve with multiple people at the table on things that they can do within the school to change it, because that's truly what we did. We were very transparent. So we would bring that data to the learning lab and say, this is what the data is telling us. Why do we think? What do you think? What do you wonder? What do you see? And really flush out all those pieces, which then force the school leaders to look at systems and processes within their schools to say, what system what's happening in my school? I mean, I will tell you, as an area superintendent, and I'll let them speak in a minute, but as an area superintendent, I oversee the student code of conduct, right? And so one of the things we found earlier in this stage, and I've been in my current role for 4 years, we did not have, prior to that, we did not have a common discipline way of work, like what considered minor infractions versus major infractions. And so schools kind of created their own way of work. And some things were very punitive and some were not, right? And so as an area superintendent stepping into this new role 4 years ago, a little bit more than 3.5 years ago, I saw that, right? And so coming from the lens where I was in middle school education, pushing this work, we brought that up to this level, right? And then we started saying, how do we challenge systems within schools? And how do we come up with one system that covers the entire school district? And I'm glad to say that part of the leadership in my new role, we implemented a uniform process for disciplinary referrals, whereas one disciplinary referrals, all the languages are very consistent and very clear. And when I pull weekly discipline data across the district, we can see where there is a misinterpretation of policies or practices and whatever case may be. But Dominique or Keisha, you want to add to that specific?
I'll answer this question. The next question is for sure for Keisha about involving students in the learning lab process. But for the data, do you remember how proudly we displayed the before and the after data? We would put up the beginning data with that same level of confidence in front of the leadership, in front of families, students, community members, and it didn't always look that good. At one point, the data was not beautiful. It was always well presented, but it showed the disparities that we should have been embarrassed about, or we should have been cautious about putting out, but we presented the data and we didn't tell people what to think of it. We showed it. We always had a protocol. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Kept the conversation very data focused. And our families would say, we see Black boys in 7th grade get suspended twice as often as non-Black boys in 7th grade. Great. What do you wonder about that? Okay, what should we do? So it would become Should we create mentor opportunities? Should we create a check-in system? Should we call their homes at the start of the week and celebrate the good? So our families saw the data for what it was, and they helped us to problem solve. Every time it was like, why didn't we think of that? They were able to give us better perspective, far better perspective. And I see the next question in the chat is asking about the youth leadership roles and agency within the Learning Lab. And Dr. Albritton did a wonderful job and is doing a wonderful job of that work currently in the high school.
So in our Learning Lab at one of the high schools where I am, students are actually a part of the Learning Lab. They are invited. So we have several magnet programs. We have invited juniors and seniors and freshmen and sophomore from those magnet programs. We have also invited parents from each magnet program. We have invited parents and family members from our community partners. We've invited the coaches. We've invited the community leadership into that Learning Lab and saying, hey, this is what our data looks like. Our discipline data, gratefully, because our PBIS system is working really well at this particular high school, is not our biggest concern at this moment. So my focus in this building is our academic data. So we look at our assessment data for math and for ELA and for social studies and for science and say, hey, this is what we are seeing. What do you notice? What do you wonder? These are the interventions that we are considering. What are some things that you think are going to work? What are some things that you think are not going to work? I had an amazing moment last year when we were examining our academic data and the interventions, where two of my high schoolers said, hey, by the way, we don't actually like this tool. And kids have figured out how to get around actually using the tool. Like they just Google and toss answers in there, so they're not really learning anything anyway. And it was eye-opening to us because we thought this is going to be great. And the kids are saying, not great, pick something else. It changed how we supported students because we were asking questions of the people who were going to be impacted. So it gave them a lot of agency. It gave them an opportunity to have their voice be heard. And for us, the buy-in was, hey, come join the Learning Lab. We can get you some volunteer hours for that. We can get you some community service hours for that. They can apply those hours towards Bright Futures, and they're participating. Their voices are heard. There's a sense of belonging for our community stakeholders, for our students, and it's changed how they interact in that space.
I'm going to go ahead and ask our last question before we close, but let me start by thanking you all so much. It's very powerful information. I look forward to hearing more when we're in Nashville, and you're doing awesome work. My question is this. We know, for example, we've had that suspensions need to come down. We know what our goals are. We know what our outcomes or the outcomes are that we want to achieve. And we have such a hard time, we meaning educators, have such a hard time getting from A to Z. And what I love so much about the Learning Lab is the focus on the process, the focus on the preparation, the focus on team dynamics, the focus on the adults. But that also, in working with school districts, frustrates adults a lot to take that time to work on those team dynamics, to take the time to understand that data is going to change slowly. Data is the last thing to change. And I'm wondering how you manage those expectations with the adults that you work with.
I think when you're involved in the process, you see the work. And when you are intentional about sharing, this is what we did this week, this is what we did last week, let's talk, let's keep everybody involved in what's happening, you get less pushback about how fast or how slow it is, because you are keeping people at the table, looking at the data, looking at the change, and talking about what they're seeing. And so you're not getting that as frequently because your teachers are at the table and they're talking about what they're seeing and what they're seeing in PBIS and what they're seeing in their students and what they're seeing in the lunchroom and what they're seeing after school, and they're looking at the data again. Hey, how are we doing? Did that thing that we said we were going to do, did it actually happen? Is it helping? Do you think it's helping? And so when people are at the table, involved in the process, looking at the data, examining it for themselves, and then communicating that, and you're giving them the vocabulary to communicate that to their friends, to their neighbors, to their parents, it's not as hard to tell people that the work is slow, because they can see even the baby steps, they can see the growth, they can see the change, but even more impactfully, they feel the shift in the building. You can sense when you walk in the door that people are more collegial, that people are friendly, that you're not seeing the kids yelling, but they're having conversations. You'll find more joy in the space, and it's the joy that sustains.
Love that answer.
And
Ruchika, do you want to close
I
us
just
out?
want to
Oh, sorry.
say,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and I love that last thing that you just said. Joy sustains. When you have that joy, when you go into a building, when people are seeing and feeling that shift and change every day, that sustains the work. And looking at the data over and over again helps us to kind of find those little pieces to be able to get there. We are thrilled and excited that you're going to be joining us in Nashville. For people who are not joining us in Nashville, we will share this presentation with you via email. We'll also, I see Dominique has shared the link for the survey. We will also reshare that link. So if you weren't able to get to it, we will share that link so you can provide us with some feedback. And we will share the resources that Pinellas County has put together to be able to share with you. We thank you for your time and appreciate your being with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are.
You too. Have a good day.
Thanks.